Today's talk, everything feeds everything. But first, a joke. Little girl around 5, 6 years old is looking at her grandfather, says, Grandpa, did God make you? And he goes, yeah. And then she goes, did God make me? And he goes, yeah. She thinks about it for a minute and says, God's getting better at this. Everything feeds everything. You know, my life, this has been so clear to me because of how many different things I've done and how each thing I have done has then fed the next thing and fed all the things that I have done right to where I am today. But before I get into my story around that, I started thinking about this on a larger scale, and it occurred to me where we are today in terms of fake news and how we got here to where we're looking out and blaming others for all this fake news we have. In every single history book in the United States, it states very clearly that Admiral Robert Peary was the first person to reach the North Pole. That is what they teach in school. Now, it turns out that as early as 1937, this man, put up the slide, Matthew Henson, was the first man to the North Pole. And they knew that in 1937, so much so that they gave him an award for it. You know what the name of the award was they gave him? The Robert Peary Award. From 1937, this man, so let me tell you a little about Matthew Henson. He was so I was remiss in February for Black History Month, not doing something, and this came up across my feed, and I thought, this is perfect on how everything feeds everything. So this guy's working as a clerk in a clothing store. Robert Peary walks in, they get into a conversation. Peary mentions he's going to the North Pole, and they hit it off so well, he invited Matthew Henson to join him. Matthew Henson turned out to be so valuable that it became his first man on the trip, was in charge of the sleds. In fact, there's a writing in which Robert Peary states that no one, including some of the Eskimos themselves, could ride a sled or take care of all the things that needed taken care of to keep them safe and alive going to the North Pole as this guy. That he was the most valuable man on the trek. So they go off on this trek to the North Pole. They get about 5 miles away, and Robert Peary can't go on. He's so sick and tired and has frostbite in all his toes. He says to Matthew, take a couple Eskimos and go plant our flag. This is the man who planted the flag on the North Pole, not Robert Peary. So they get back, and Congress goes nuts over Robert Peary, and Robert Peary, Admiral Peary, does not deny all the hype he's getting and that he was the first man to the North Pole. He gives this guy credit for being along on the ride. Now, everybody kept logs and journals back then. And so these journals were finally read by some folks who realized that Robert Peary never made it. He did. And in 1937, they started going, what are we going to do about this? We already have the Robert Peary Award. We already have it in all the history books that it was Robert Peary. What are we going to do about this? Well, We can't have a black man be the first guy to be to the North Pole. So we'll just leave it as it is. Fake news. Turns out our history books are full of it. And the way we present our history to our kids who then believe it. So given that all these old white guys decided that fake news was okay back in as early, as far back as you want to go, of course, that was going to proliferate into more and more to where we think our president or others in Washington are doing it for the first time. When this is simply the outcropping of us making decisions, and when I say us, I mean our forebears, because I wasn't born at the time. Making decisions and not really caring about the truth. And the thing about the slippery slope of not caring about the truth is that it goes and it goes and it goes until he's actually given an award named after the guy who didn't make it. Now, before his death in 1955, they did honor him by putting him in the same club with people like Neil Armstrong and others of that who were the first. So they did finally, but they didn't change the history books. You still can't open a history book and where it says first man in North Pole, see him. You still see Robert Perry. Everything feeds everything. That's how we got to today. The internet doing what it's doing and nobody really caring about the truth. Starts way before now. Okay, thank you. Matthew Henson. That's right. He made that whole thing possible. Robert Perry was in bed at the time. A bed built and set up by him and a few Eskimos. All right. Everything feeds everything. So I decide I want to write songs. And I start writing songs. And then I realized, what am I going to do with these songs? I got to learn how to play them, so I had to learn how to play, so I started playing the guitar. I start going out and doing gigs, and that leads to me having to realize, actually, to get these out to people, I need to be able to record them, so I start learning how to record stuff. Then all of a sudden, that leads to, well, if I'm going to take this route of being a musician, I got to learn how to pay for myself in the meantime. I got to support myself, got to eat. So I need to develop some skills that I can actually do something with. And I came up with this wild idea. Well, everything feeds everything. Let me even back up further. 3 weeks before Christmas, I would work so hard on my music and nothing else, I found myself homeless in New York City on a park bench in the snow and the cold. One of my friends mentioned that to a realtor who, because I guess it was close to Christmas, had goodness in his heart, said to me that he had a place I could stay for a couple of weeks until after the new year, but then I'd have to get out. I'd have to figure myself out, but at least I didn't have to be on a park bench. And he takes me to an apartment. It's a 5-bedroom apartment in Park Slope in Brooklyn with the most gorgeous woodwork I had ever seen. I mean, the place was gigantic. And he says, I haven't rented it. This is not a good time to rent it. I won't rent it till after the first of the year. You can stay here. Well, in the meantime, I get this idea that if I rent out all the apartments and find roommates, I might actually get to live here. So I did that. Actually, within 2 weeks of putting it in the paper, filled the place with roommates and was able to pay him the rent he was asking on it. He was so impressed with that, he said, "Do you want to do that again for another apartment?" I have. And so I said, okay. And then looked at the other apartment. We negotiated the rent because this time I wanted to make a profit on it for what I rented out the separate bedrooms for. And I recognized in what I thought I could get for each apartment and started renting those out. And this happened time and time again. He started telling his landlord friends about me, and all of a sudden, I have 50 tenants. I'm collecting over $36,000 a month in rent, and I'm making over $75,000 a year cash. Developed a business out of that. From being homeless to having now enough money, my own one-bedroom place. Then my wife, at the time, mother of my son, says she's pregnant. And I realize I don't want to raise my son in Brooklyn. So we start looking for a place up out of the city and wind up living in a place on and actually what happened was my dad called me after telling me when I was younger that he would never ever let me live in the family home on the lake, offered me the family home on the lake for an exorbitant rent. I said yes, got up there. It was this big farmhouse. It was as if you lived in a tent because you could feel the wind off the lake just run through the house as if there were not walls there. It was built in the 1800s and wasn't fixed up much over that time, except did have running water and an indoor bathroom that my grandfather had put in there. So I'm in this house now, and because I had learned so much about having roommates, I found the perfect and right roommates to have in that house with us, with my child and my ex-wife, and we lived there for a while. And I tried doing carpentry and getting some work, and obviously needed to do something different. I was no longer in the city, couldn't do that anymore, but I had learned enough about business and this and that to look for a job. And one day, I found a job selling insurance. Now, everything feeds everything. One of the things I forgot to mention is very early on in my life, when I was in my 20s, I was a stockbroker down on Wall Street. I had passed the Series 7, and so when it came time to pass the test to become an insurance salesman, they were a snap compared to a Series 7 test. So I ran through that with one of the highest scores they'd ever seen. That was very impressive to my boss. He put me in charge of group insurance, which, because I was very good about how groups work and things of that nature, actually found a way to sell insurance that nobody had ever thought of before, developed a product that nobody had ever thought of, and started selling millions of dollars of it. Everything feeds everything. The thing was, he said, if you want to keep this job, you have to learn how to use a computer. At that time, I had never turned on one. And I thought would spend my whole life without ever having to. And he's telling me, if you want to keep supporting your wife and kid in the style you are now becoming accustomed to, you got to learn how to use this computer. So I turn it on and I start learning programs. This is way back in the 90s. This is not Windows 10. This is Windows 2. And Excel and Word, and I'm looking at these things and realizing that if I'm going to learn this stuff, I might as well do it well, and so spend hours and hours and hours at this, to where I develop a system of using these things that where now the IT guy is coming and starting to ask me questions about, and because sometimes the network in the place would go down, these are the early days of networking, I got very involved in that, and the next thing I know, I'm out in Asheville, North Carolina, after I got sick and was in the hospital, which I know I've told you guys about, sold my book of business, moved down to Asheville, North Carolina, and the first job I got down there was being an IT guy. Everything feeds everything. So now I'm an IT guy, making my living like that in Asheville, North Carolina. Well, one of the things now that I'm really good at computers that's starting to develop more and more is recording music on computers. So when I want to start doing music again and want to record, now I'm starting to do it in the computer. Because everything feeds everything, and I've gotten so good with computers, I was really good at how to record music into the computer and started using some of the latest technology to do that. Everything feeds everything. So I did that for a while. And then when my ex and I separated, I was pretty distraught. And that's when I went and met Dr. John Waterhouse, who, if anybody doesn't know that name, is the ex-president of our movement and was the minister at the time and is now with his wife of the Center for Spiritual Living in Asheville, North Carolina. So I get in there and start going to the church and start being there, and they need help around their sound, which I have now at this point done for over 30 years as a musician, being out and all this. And so where some people were like having so much trouble figuring out what they thought was complexity of sound system and everything they were using, for me, it was simple. I'd been doing this forever. Everything feeds everything. So now I'm starting to volunteer at the center. I'm the sound person. And one day the music director quits. And because I'm a musician and been doing this so long and had bands that got as far as opening for the Rolling Stones and had a couple of records out and music published and all that kind of stuff, all of a sudden they're asking me to be the music director, and now I'm the music director of the church. Well, as a music director of the church, after a few years, I start writing songs again because I've been writing songs forever. And we start playing the songs at the church, and all of a sudden, all the congregants are coming up to me. One day, they come up to me with a wad of cash like this and go, "Why don't you make a record of these songs that you've been singing here? They're great. We want to take them home." And since I was really good at recording music on the computer, I sat down at the computer at home and started recording all those songs, and that CD got around the country. And then all of a sudden, I start getting calls from other churches asking me, other centers saying, "Hey, come play at our center. We think your songs are great." And then I start traveling around the country doing that. Everything feeds everything. Well, I'm doing that for a while, and all of a sudden, one day, somebody comes up to me when I'm at a church and goes, "It's a long and winding story. But the key to all this is what I want you to do is start looking at your own life, because I'm sure this isn't only true for me. I'm sure that you can see for yourself, if you take a look at how everything you've done has led you to where you are right now. Because that's the real key to what it is I'm talking about. This isn't really about me, though I'm using me as an example here. This is how each of us gets to where we are now, and looking at how every skill we learned somehow pays off in the next thing we're doing, and it all feeds each other. Everything feeds everything. And so I'm traveling around, and one day, one of the ministers at the church I was at says, "If you do the talk as well as play the music, we can pay you more." Now, I'd never done the talk before, but I thought if I'm going to get paid more, I'm going to do it. And since I had all that experience of being on stage as a musician and all the things that went on around that, being on stage and doing the talk didn't seem to be very hard for me at all. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but this isn't very hard for me, being up here talking to you like this. And so I started doing the talk. And then I started noticing that I was actually enjoying my interaction and being able to share my ideas about consciousness more than even playing the music. And so my very Jewish mother one day, out of nowhere, says to me, "Why don't you just become a minister?" And so I thought, that's a really good idea. Everything feeds everything. And all of a sudden, I'm in ministerial school. And I graduate ministerial school, and the first thing that occurs to me, because I've been so deep into the internet and computers and IT and all this stuff, is why don't I start a virtual center? And in fact, started the first virtual center of Centers for Spiritual Living before they even knew what to think about it or what to call it or how to be with it. And so they really weren't a lot of support around it, but they didn't get in my way either because they thought, okay, this is something that's sooner or later going to take off in the future, which of course it has. But at the time, because I had all this experience in computers and how they work and all this stuff, I started a virtual center. Well, now I'm doing this virtual center thing, and I miss the hugs. I miss being in person with people. And so Ash and I start traveling around. Well, and speaking of, because I'm so comfortable with computers, I, of course, meet a woman who's also comfortable with computers. For those of you who don't know, we met on Facebook and developed our relationship from there. Everything feeds everything. It's not surprising to me that we met on Facebook, given how my life is led boom, 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 boom. So we decided, we want to go around and start checking out the different centers in the area. And we do that, and we walk into this sanctuary when Harry was still the minister here and go, oh my God, this place feels great. Now, we had also gone to all the other centers in this area, and there's like 6 or 7 of them. But this was the one that felt great. We came back a couple of other times, and, when we could, and were around. And then the day came when I heard about the job opening here, that you guys were looking for a new minister. And I thought, wow, look at how life works. When you keep following it step by step, no matter how winding the road might be, because life's not a straight line. It was in no way surprising to me that Ash and I wound up here. And so what happens when I get here is I find out that, there's a lot of building maintenance. There's a lot of accounting. There's a lot of business. I'm a landlord, right? We have like 20 different group rentals here. And all these things, there's computers to be handled, PowerPoint, there's sound and there's music. And here's the thing about that. About 20 years ago, I put up an affirmation for myself that said, every part of me gets used for the good of humanity. Every part of me. Now, in between all this, I woke up one day with the wild idea of starting a suicide crisis hotline. And I did that. I started one in Asheville. We got it going. We took over 10,000 calls in 3 years that I was there. My very first call was somebody that said, I have a knife to my throat and you have 10 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't cut my throat. There were lots of calls like that. We didn't lose a single person. We had 60 volunteers. Everything feeds everything. You know what that taught me? What's not life and death. And a lot of what we deal with here is not life and death. When something is life and death, I can see it. I've been homeless. I've been pronounced dead by doctors myself. And I've worked with people who are ready to go now. Everything feeds everything. I look back on my life and how it's led me to here, to be with you now. And I say to myself, what an extraordinary journey. And it wasn't anywhere near a straight line, not even close. So what I offer you today is to look at your life. Look at the journey you have taken. Look where it has taken you. Look at everything you've done in your life and how it's feeding who you are now. The brilliance of who you are now. This is what's so wondrous about life. I know there are those in the world who think if you can march a straight line, you get the American dream. But there's a much higher dream. I love the opportunities I have every day to open my heart and mind. I love the opportunities I have to see things I've never seen before and to easily negotiate those that I have. There are parts of your life that are like that, where you're dealing with things that you have never dealt with before. Embrace those. Not many people get to have stuff they've never had before. They don't get to have circumstances they've never had before. And embrace the ones that you're clear about, that are, you've done. Because that part of your life gets to be easy, simple. Having those two parts, that's what makes for a wondrous journey. Having those two parts, seeing how everything feeds everything in the world, in ourselves, how we arrived at where we are in the world, because nothing has happened in a vacuum. It's all working together. And the more we can see it, the more we can recognize it, the more we get to enjoy it. Thrive in it. Because that's what I know for each and every one of you. Each of you are a limitless power that gets to thrive. I love you. Thank you. All right. Here's the part of the program where we pray on somebody. Who's coming up to be prayed on today? Who has the courage to let us all be healed because you stand up here for a healing? Because that's what happens when somebody stands up here for a healing. We all get healed. Who's going to be our courageous one for today? Oh, we got somebody up. Come on down. All right. So tell us, look out there, tell us your name. Use this. Tell us your name and what you want us to know for you.
Hello. Yes, my name is Freddy Torres. I've been coming to this center since Dr. Harry was the minister over here.
What do you want us to know for you?
And I want to pray for my friend Reina. We've been friends since we were 17 back in Nicaragua. And we're running through each other. And I have a story like Reverend Cliff. So I want to pray for her to be healed. She's battling cancer and very advanced and very damaging. So I want to.
All right. Come on, stand here. Stand here. Here you go. 8 to 10. Come up and lay hands on this man. Tell me your name again.
Freddie.
Freddie. Thank you. All right. And as always, we take a deep breath, close our eyes, and relax. And we start by feeling that healing, loving energy in our own hearts. Feel it radiate inside of you, that healing, loving energy. Now let it expand throughout your entire body. Feel the healing presence of light and love in you. Feel it heal. And now let it expand throughout the room. And those of you online, join us here and feel the healing energy, because the internet, there is no space that can stop the connection, the love, the light of this spiritual family. And now we take this energy and we send it through Freddie knowing he and his friend are healed, knowing the highest and best, knowing that all is in perfect alignment with the divine. Know for Freddie his own health and well-being, his light, his love, and his deep connection with his dear, dear friend.
My soul sings out to you, my love. My soul sings out to you. My soul sings out to you, my love. My soul sings out to you.
And I am so, so grateful for the power, the presence, the healing that happens right here and now, knowing the truth of ourselves for Freddie, for his friend, knowing the highest and best happens right here and now. And I release this knowing it to be so, as we all say together, and so it is. All right. Feel the energy in the room. Can you feel it? It's palpable, that healing, loving essence that is for each of us. Thank you, Freddie, for standing up, for your friend, for all of us. Thank you. All right. This is a part of the program where I ask you to take out what you're going to give and hold it in your hand. Unfold it. Unfold it. There's power here. There's power in the divine of what we give. It doesn't matter whether it's $1, $10, $100, $1,000, deeds of property, diamonds, gold mines. Hold it in your hand as we say together, God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What I give, I receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am, and so it is.